love to hear that enthusiasm on day 3. So let's push on through to the end. We're getting there. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Julie Lammers, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Corporate Social Responsibility for the national nonprofit American Student Assistance. And I'm really excited to be here with our great group of panelists. We've got Laura Tierney, the founder and CEO of the Social Institute, Sofia Ongele. Did I do okay? She'll correct me, that's right. A digital strategist with Gen Z for Change and a junior at Columbia University. We've got Lexi McMenamin, news and politics editor for Teen Vogue. And from ASA, Kaylee Johnson, who is our market research manager that looks at all of our digital insights and has helped build some products for us at ASA. American Student Assistance is a national nonprofit that's focusing on how we change the way kids learn about career and navigate a path to post-secondary education and career success. But one of the things that we really try to embed into all of the program we do is youth perspective, youth voice. And in this last year, we have done a lot of work to try to build a lot of career readiness skills actually through the platform of advocacy. How can young people learn to advocate for themselves better in both the sort of political world, but also in their lives? How are they navigating education systems? How are they educating workforce systems? Self-advocacy is a really important tool to have, and so we have built in the last year a platform called Next Voice that will allow students to do that. So we wanted to talk today with our panelists about the issue of youth activism. Well, we have experts who have done this for quite a while. I'd love to go down the line and have you introduce yourselves and just briefly tell us about your organization and what you're aiming to do.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Tierney. I'm the founder and CEO here at the Social Institute. We serve K-12 schools and districts across the country with the mission of helping them navigate their social world, particularly social media and technology. The idea was born because I was 13 years old when I got my first phone, and it's nothing like the one I have today, but it did connect me with all my friends, and I grew up in the age, kind of the birth of social media in my life, and I felt like, gosh, there must be a better way to resonate with students. So everything we do is co-created with thousands of students across the country and deeply, deeply believe in student voice.
Wonderful. Sofia.
Hi, I'm Sofia Ongele. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Santa Clarita, California, and I now go to school in New York City studying computer science at Columbia University, and I'm a digital strategist for Gen Z for Change. Gen Z for Change essentially started as a network of a bunch of ragtag teens on TikTok who just wanted to get Biden elected. And after we created this entire network of creators and this true relational organizing network and Biden got elected, we're like, well, this isn't the end of activism by any means. Our activism is not limited to electoral politics. And now we use technology and social media to be able to give youth the ability to be empowered by what's happening around them, to be able to make change using what's happening around them, and to be able to hone their personal skills to be able to make an impact in their world.
Lexi.
Hi, I'm Lexi McMenamin. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the news and politics editor at Teen Vogue. We cover issues that matter to young people. Broadly, I would say the biggest things that I have to cover right now, thanks to Ron DeSantis and various state legislatures across the country, is adults bullying queer kids. But besides that, we do a bunch of other stuff and are really invested in publishing op-eds and other reported features from young people, from high schoolers, college students, people who choose not to go down an educational route whatsoever, but are still, young people. And yeah, really excited to talk about what I'm hearing and what we're all hearing from young people about the stuff they need and the stuff they're not getting.
Wonderful, thanks Lexi. And Kaylee.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Johnson. I'm the market research manager at American Student Assistance, and I can't give our organization a better introduction than Julie can, but my job is really in making sure that we are elevating teens' voices as we are creating digital solutions to solve some of the problems that they themselves have told us they are facing. So the element of the co-creation that Laura managed is really, really important and at the center of our ethos as well. And so as we begin to sort of navigate this new and evolving digital world, we want to meet teens where they're spending their time and really be able to help solve, like I said before, problems that they themselves are telling us. And we begin to learn about that through doing market research, which I do, and doing things like focus groups and interviews with teens, so that really everything we do is led by and driven by the students that we're looking to serve. So.
Thanks. So, Kaylee, we're going to start with you. At ASA, one of the things that we have been increasingly concerned about is we see this generation of students that are incredibly engaged, want to be engaged, have a deep commitment to a lot of social issues, but they really have a hard time understanding how they can best engage. And so Kaylee has done quite a bit of work around trying to understand what are the things that are resonating most for young people, what Gen Z is really saying they care about and want to do more on, and the ways in which they sort of interact with social media in order to make that happen. So Kaylee, can you share some of your research?
Yeah, certainly. So we'll go right from the very beginning here. And our recent research has demonstrated that 9 in 10 teens care about at least one social issue or cause. And the top things on their mind are mental health, racial justice, gender equality, climate change, and LGBTQ+ rights. We also learned that the top issues that teens actually have taken action on in 2022 were mental health and racial equality. So these are things that are really near and dear to them, to the point that it's motivating them to go out and actually get involved in the causes. We further found that it's not just about passion with Gen Z. A quarter of the teens that we surveyed in this particular instance say that the social issues and causes that they care about have highly impacted their career decisions. So you're beginning to see where sort of that motivation is crossing not just from passion in their, their personal lives or their volunteer efforts, but actually really translating into a vocation for them. So it's really important to kind of understand what these issues are and how important it is to them, because it will have long-term ripple effects in their careers. And then finally, the top influences on teens' social positions are their friends and their family. So as they're beginning to develop the things that they care about, that mental health focus, racial equality and justice, gender equality, their views are really informed by their parents and guardians and their friends. So I'll stop here, and then we'll get into sort of some of the paradoxes after we've had time for our panel to react.
Yeah. So let me turn to my panelists. Is this what you are hearing from the young people that you interact with as well? Are there other things that you feel like are left off this list that are raising to the top? Is there something you see students mobilizing on in particular? Maybe Lexi, we can start with you. From a Teen Vogue perspective, are there things that young people want to speak out more on these days?
I would say the only thing that I have noticed a lot of, and I have reported on Gen Z for Change's work around this specifically, is workers' rights and unionization. I think that I talk about my teen sibling a lot because they are kind of my petri dish of what's going on with the youth, right? And they're really struggling to get a job at the local Starbucks, which, as we all know, has been rife with accusations of union busting. And Gen Z for Change has pretty notably, I won't take your spotlight, but done a lot to clog union busting job application portals for companies, including Starbucks, but also others like Kroger. And I think that that's pretty unanimous across the board, that the same sort of we're hearing so much about, there's so many jobs, we can't fill jobs, blah, blah, blah. But wages are actually very low, and actually young people are also still struggling to get these jobs that we're saying no one is hiring for or no one's applying to. And I am curious to hear if Sofia has more thoughts on that, but that was the first thought I had.
I think the biggest thought that I have is specifically that most, if not all, of these issues intersect with one another, right? If the climate is doing so poorly and people are experiencing climate anxiety, that goes directly into mental health. Same thing with environmental injustice and environmental racism goes in line. Same with gender equality and LGBTQ rights having intersections as well. So I think that there's definitely going to be significant overlap. And then I also think specifically on the workers' rights point, I think frankly, Gen Z has had kind of a really rough upbringing, if I'm being honest, whether it be COVID being at this point 15% of our entire lives, or the first president that we have full recollection of being Donald Trump, or it keeps going and going and going. And then like we're tasked with fixing all of these problems that we didn't create. And I think that with that, Gen Z is trying to find ways to be able to use the mediums that are most native to us to make that change, or to attempt to make that change. And specifically as it relates to like family and friends being like the biggest driving factor for that, I think that's the more reason that we need to be having these really difficult conversations in every single space that we find ourselves in, because that's the only way that we can truly engage with the issues and make it out with something fruitful.
I'd love to hear you respond to that. How are you using the sort of social media platforms to talk about some of these issues that are clearly at the forefront of conversations teens are having online? They may not be at the forefront of what schools are having online, and that weird intersection, or complicated intersection, I will say, between what students are saying in a digital space and what is happening in a school district.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, because I think this data also introduces an important challenge of what schools and districts and educators across the country are feeling and facing right now. And it's this really complex spectrum of challenges where, mental health is in a rough place with students right now, as it is with educators. And, there's no doubt students can't be what they can't see. And so if you have adults equally struggling with a lot of these topics and how to talk about them, that puts K-12 schools in a tricky spot of how do you proactively address some of these high percentages on the screen in an effective, thoughtful way that it's embedded into the schedule, of a K-12 day. So I think in the next few years, thanks to social media and what you're doing, and thanks to students, Lexi, getting so much of their news from social media now, but they're spending hours, so much of their day in school. So this slide, I think, introduces a really exciting question and opportunity for school leaders and educators, which is how can you take a more proactive approach to discussing these topics in a really meaningful way for students that doesn't feel forced, but it feels effective and meets them on their level.
And how does the Social Institute do that? How do you work with schools to make that possible?
Yeah, well, like most entrepreneurs, I feel like I lived the problem. When I was in school, growing up in middle school and high school, our school would bring in a one-time speaker, once a year to talk about certain issues, one being the growth of social media and how it was destroying our lives, and it was going to tear apart our core values and destroy our reputations. And you just kind of sit there and you tune out of the assembly, and you're like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They probably don't even use social media themselves. And so what we decided to do was to build this interactive, gamified technology that schools could therefore weave into their own schedule in 15-minute intervals, or embed it into class, like science class and social studies. And as we evolved at the Social Institute, we started integrating more current events, and that's when it really got exciting and interesting, because the students really leaned into it. And it ties back to Kaylee, the research here is they want to be talking about what is current and going on in their lives right now.
That's great. So changing gears for just a minute, Kaylee, can you talk a little bit about the additional research that you did about issues of access and kids are using these platforms in new ways that many of us, now that I feel very old in my 40s, never grew up with, right? All I knew was Facebook for a very long time. But there are access issues. Tell us a little bit more about what your research is showing as far as what kids are accessing.
Absolutely. So when it comes to Gen Z, the teens that we've spoken to in the last few years in activism around the causes and issues they care about, there are kind of two paradoxes that have kind of emerged from our research. So the first is sort of a paradox of efficacy. It's that tension between passion and efficacy. So the first statistic up there, it shows just under 2/3 of teens are passionate about changing the world for the better. But a slightly smaller percentage of teens say that they actually can change the world for the better. In an ideal world, we'd love to see those statistics a little bit closer together to really have that, that real feeling of efficacy accompanying the passion that they have for changing the world for the better. So that's a little bit of a paradox. One, that issue has more to do with efficacy, whereas the second paradox really has to do with participation. So while almost half of teens consider themselves to be engaged in causes and issues, less than a quarter report actually getting involved in those causes and issues. And you see that disparity in the numbers there, almost half versus under a quarter. That really leads that second paradox of passion versus participation. So this is the one that was really motivating to ASA, was trying to kind of understand how can we take this passion that young people have for all these different causes and issues that my fellow panelists have spoken about so eloquently here. How do we kind of redress that gap? How do we close that gap? And part of the way, and to give you a little bit more information, it comes down to that lack of engagement or lack of participation. It's really a lack of knowledge. So almost half of our teen panel reported not having enough information or not having the right tools to really help themselves to get involved in the causes and issues that they care about. But something that I think everyone in this panel has touched on briefly is that we've got a solution in place. So while that 46% seems a little bleak, the fact that teens are so engaged in social causes and issues on digital platforms where we know they're already spending their time, it leads to some really interesting solutions. And that is kind of where we see coming about in our second statistic here, where 6 in 10 teens say that they learn about social issues on digital platforms, and 42% say that they're actually sharing content about those social issues on these platforms. Although my guess is that when you're like Sofia, that number will jump right up from 42%, right? And then the last piece of information I have to give to you is that teens really do view digital platforms like social media and the internet as really more effective than other methods of making change. So while 59% say that advocating on social media, sharing content around the causes and issues they care about is an effective way of making change, compared to only less than 50% who feel that same way about voting, protesting, donating, or writing to legislators. So it speaks to some real power of social media to be able to kind of bring teens together. They share content, they can really create change around issues there, and they view that as particularly self-effective. So again, these digital platforms and tools and getting teens engaged online can really actually redress that gap between the efficacy and passion as well as between the participation and passion.
Great. So I'd love to understand. First of all, does this ring true for you? And Sofia, I'd love to understand how your organization in particular got from the point of just information sharing, right, and trying to the actual step of digital virtual organizing, and then sort of activating kids to do things in the real world. As you say, it wasn't just about voting. That was the original push, but then you have expanded that since the election to do an increased amount of virtual organizing. That your goal is to have real effect and make real change in the real world, not just talk about these things online, but how can you actually get students involved? So can you talk a little bit about the process that you've gone through to try to get students from the point where Kaylee says they're sort of passively engaging or just reading content to actually taking a stand and making some change?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and I'm really lucky to have parents that have really made me understand exactly how civics works in the United States, but the civics education in this country, it's not it. And with that, teens don't know the avenues through which change can be made, especially on a legislative level. And so what we're doing is being able to democratize that information as well as streamline it. So just one example being in Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin had made an anti-CRT tip line where he was like, report your teachers teaching CRT. And I coded a little something that would allow...
Critical race theory for those that are not, that you use the acronym.
Oh, CRT? Oh, do we not know what CRT is?
I just like to clarify acronyms for everyone. So,
critical race theory, this invisible boogeyman that isn't actually in our schools. This tip line was made essentially to tell on teachers for teaching history, essentially. And so we coded a little something that would allow people to send tips that were lines from the Bee Movie and random song lyrics, and the entire tip line was unusable within 48 hours. Not only that, what I think is a little bit cooler is that afterwards, the governor was subpoenaed, and they wanted to see like what was inside of the tip line, and that still hasn't been released because if they open the email box, like it's not going to be what you want. And that's just one core example of being able to just make a little something, explain the issue, explain how we're going about changing this, and then making it as easy as possible. So it's like people could click a button and then just send a funny little email and go along with their day, and then they would send it to their friends, and that's relational organizing. That's taking what you've seen happen once and work for you and sharing it with everyone else, and that relational organizing is how we get our activism off the ground. But I think another thing is that there's this notion that like to change the world, to change people's lives is like to cure cancer or something. And making change in your local community or making change on a small scale is equally as important. And I think that it goes back to being able to understand the system and have the skill sets necessary to change that system. Did something similar in my hometown. There was a school shooting in my hometown, and there was a movement by two of the parents who had kids die in the shooting, who wanted to be memorialized at Central Park. Central Park was the reunification point for the shooting, and there was a member of our water board. I don't know what a water board is. I'll tell you that right now. I have no idea. But they had to approve it for it to go through, and this guy made this like 9-page paper saying why we should memorialize these kids because it's political. And then just within my local community, I coded something super quickly to allow people to send in, this wasn't like Bee Movie, because it's not the right time to use the Bee Movie, but we sent in emails on emails saying that you should memorialize these kids because of what people have been through and what this means to our community. And out of the 60 or so public comments, like 50-something were made using the site that we had made, and that shows that it's not a matter of people not wanting or feeling apathetic towards these systems. It's not necessarily understanding how. Right. And we're trying to bridge that education gap by building these tools and then also having people understand how exactly civics works, both on a national scale and in their local communities.
It's so important. I mean, I think that's exactly what the research says, Kaylee, right? It's not that they are apathetic to it. It's just they don't have the tools or understanding of where to go in order to put their interests to work.
Yeah, if I can really quickly, that's exactly right. And the other thing is when we were looking at trying to understand what it is that really teens think activism is, we asked, do you feel like it's more sort of like a legislative within Congress, passing things through the House and Senate type of change? Do you think it's more local? What do you think? And they really came down on the side of it's both. So that was really encouraging to hear about your local community, because I think a lot of teens too, Get Out the Vote campaigns have been incredibly, incredibly effective. But you can't vote until you're 18 in this country. So that automatically, it can really feel very disempowering. But getting involved at a local level, making change in your own community through any number of different ways, right? It's an incredibly important thing for teens. And to have them be able to tell us, it's definitely about pushing things through Congress, but it's also about making change in my own community, signing petitions, organizing around things that matter. That's very encouraging, for sure.
So switching gears slightly, I think it's really important in all of the work that we're doing to elevate youth voices in this work. Lexi, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Teen Vogue has a huge platform that students, young people listen to, and we hope, if they're reading what you're writing.
We do.
And I'd love to understand, because we struggle with how do we find teens sort of willing to put themselves on the record and talk about these issues publicly. It is sort of sourcing of really powerful voices in the youth community. They're out there. I'd love to understand the process that Teen Vogue goes through for really sort of picking your spokespeople. What are the issues that you're going to write about? How do you understand what is most important for young people to hear? I'd love to understand that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm 27, so I'm like Gen Z millennial cusp. I get gatekept out of Gen Z a lot, and I won't be offended if you guys want to do that. That's okay. And as mentioned, I rely on my teen sibling a lot. I'm definitely a social media native, and I'm a former organizer myself, so a lot of how I developed an understanding of like the different like political spheres that are already ongoing, especially like in terms of youth organizing, was from, you know, cutting my teeth doing the same thing. And I'm fortunate to have found a really great organizing community that was in-person organizing pre-COVID on my college campus, which is really not an option for young people now. The way that, I mean, in addition to, I know we noted like the presidential election as one kickoff point that's sort of transitioned a more notable rise in youth engagement around social issues, but I also think that for me, I was really radicalized by the Ferguson protests over Mike Brown, and also Trayvon Martin before that. And so 2020, obviously, I think really shifted how we communicate. Sorry, this seems like I'm going off topic, but to bring it back, I think because we were all forced to engage in a primarily digital format around social issues, and because people were mostly stuck indoors, and so they were really, 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 really online, I've noticed that there is an interesting shift in which the infographic on Instagram stories almost feels like the sole source of being able to engage for a lot of young people. Like a lot of the high schoolers I speak to feel really like all I can do is share information and make sure my friends read it, which, you know, is like 0.5 towards relational organizing, but not quite, right? And so I think something I think a lot about is how, you know, I rate 800 to 1,500 to 3,000 words in a single piece, and I know my sibling's not going to read all that. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to condense information into the smallest possible takeaways, because it's true, like their attention is constantly divided. We're expecting young people to be entering, as I mentioned, like a completely implausible job market. A lot of people are choosing not to go to higher education because they can't afford it. Since 2020, many people have dropped out. Like a lot of people have dropped out of college and higher education since COVID started. Within my own family, like I know multiple people who haven't gone back to college and can't afford it. So I think the highest priority that I tend to have is to the points that we're all making, acknowledging that it's not a lack of interest or care, but recognizing that it genuinely is about a state of affairs that is so dire, and then also a broader political system that thrives off of making people feel disempowered. But I think something I'm struggling with right now is, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Stop Willow movement that really has blown up over the last few weeks, which is regarding a proposed oil rig in Alaska's North Shore. If it gets approved by President Biden, it would be backtracking on his own campaign promises. The vast majority of people who have participated in the social media campaign are young people, and I'm really concerned about what's going to happen if he does go forward with it, because when you look at the numbers, it's simply astronomical. Like, I think it was something like 570 million views across platforms in the last week and a half on this subject.
Over 800.
Now it's over 800 million across platforms on this issue. Obviously, Gen Z for Change is working on this too. But it's a decentralized movement, the Stop Willow campaign, which I think is evidence of how successful, like the efficacy of broadening digital strategies and explaining to young people how they can use those things. But we also need to be creating campaigns that remind them that, like, okay, if the Willow Project goes through, climate change is not, it's not like, oh, we're screwed and the planet's gonna catch on fire. Because a lot of young people see this stuff and then are like, oh my God, there's no coming back. Like, you're right, the climate crisis is gonna end my life. And like maybe, I don't know. But like, I think it would probably be a lot better to be showing 16-year-olds ways that they can care about politics and not feel completely like hopeless if the one campaign that they got really engaged around.
What's the opportunity rather than...
Yes.
Yes. I'd love to hear from you, Laura. So you created the Social Institute with 50,000 Gen Z students. Is that right? First of all, I'd love to understand what that process was like, and why did you think that was so important to have it be Gen Z driven and have them co-create this experience with and for you?
Yeah, so for a little bit of backstory on the kind of inspiration that drove me to huddle with students. So I grew up a student athlete, played field hockey and soccer, eventually got recruited to play at Duke, and also played with Team USA. And while that was happening, social media emerged like more and more for brands. It wasn't just like you get a Facebook profile or whatever profile was out there. Like brands started getting on social media, and that's when you kind of heard more lecturing, at you of all the terrible ways it was going to hurt our lives. I went on to get 3 out of my 4 jobs thanks to social media, and I feel like just the mission that also ASA has of building career skills among students, I felt like I was using social media to help advance my career in different ways. And so, thinking about my sports experience, I'm like, gosh, it's like a lot of students are going from grade to grade, like without coaches in their lives on how to navigate things positively. Like any coach you ever play for, they don't tell you, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. They show you how to kick the ball, they show you how to score, they show you how to pass. And so I was like, wow, like what if we could start huddling with students, like in school cafeterias, like around the lunch table, in the library, just having brainstorms of like what skills they want to know. And I'll never forget, and Lexi, you were just like making this point of like the how, like one 11th grader I remember approached me and she's like, Laura, like the adults, like here's like what we need to know, teach us the how, like how we can speak up for what we believe in a way that can create the change we want. And so that put kind of schools in an interesting position of like, how do we answer that question, right? And whether you play sports, whether you're a 6th grade teacher, like you believe repetition is the mother of learning. And so that was the inspiration for like, let's keep huddling with students. Let's brainstorm something that students can learn about on a regular basis as they go to school. And it's a way that it's delivered in a way that like doesn't put teachers in an uncomfortable situation, because I know a lot of schools are in that spot right now where like the word SEL is really scary, and then is it digital citizenship? Like, what is it? I think of it's like modern life skills, right? It's just modern life skills. And social media isn't going away anytime soon, thankfully, because it's how students are social, at the end of the day. It's how we are social. And so, I think nothing beats student voice. We all know that. We're here for those reasons. And so those brainstorms at lunch and through surveys and more, it just led to such this authentic, like soul of the platform that we built. And it serves 4th grade through 12th grade. And so just making sure things are developmentally relevant and more. It's been such a learning curve over the years, but it's just, student voice is like so pure, like there's no agenda behind it. It just is what it is. And so that was, just some of the, it was a bumpy ride though, I think, to get to this point. There's no sugarcoating it, but like there's just been a lot of ups and downs of being an entrepreneur in K-12 through COVID and all. But I think that the mission of supporting students at the end of the day, it's so worth it.
So going back to that point of the purity of student voice, there's a lot of misinformation you can also get on social media, in lots of different media these days, and helping students understand how to parse truth from fiction, and what is information they should sort of rely on is a really difficult and complex issue for both schools, parents, and students themselves, young people themselves, to try to navigate. How do you help schools do that? And I'd love to understand from all of your perspectives, how do you address that issue in the work that you do to really help young people activate in a way that is meaningful and powerful and is based on fact, because it's really tricky to decipher that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we were brainstorming what Win at Social would be with students, we ended up locking in on these 7 standards that would organize the topics we would cover related to current events, life skills, and playing to your core, protecting your privacy, kind of like you're famous, striking a balance. But the one that I particularly really love too, as a female founder, just growing up, is the standard find your influencers, and recognizing that we are influenced by the people around us, by the content that we see in so many different ways, whether we are aware of it or not. And so teaching students those skills in every single year, throughout the year multiple times, through current events and more, is like, yeah, how are you digging deep into who you're following online, and how are you whether you're unfollowing sources that you feel like aren't aligned with your values, or you're following sources that you don't necessarily agree with, but they're helping you understand different perspectives that you may not, agree with, but you're building up your empathy, I think, and understanding of what others might be trying to say. And I remember one of the students texted me, and she was like, this is how many positive role models our class is now following thanks to this exercise. And again, you can't be what you can't see, and there's folks like Sofia and so many other people out there that you could be learning from. And so I think as you see the rise of ChatGPT and other platforms, you're talking about those 21st century skills, we need to dive even deeper with the students, just to think of not just taking something as it is, but really stress testing it and making sure it has some solid credibility behind it.
And before I go on to the rest of the panel, how much do you have to work with teachers in order to make sure that they have a toolkit, right, to communicate that with students? Because it is a new skill to learn. Many of them may not have had to navigate a social media world when they started teaching, and it is a completely new sort of subject area for teachers as well.
Yeah. So really quick about this. I kind of like in social media to go into the mall on a Friday night, and I don't know if any of y'all go to the mall on a Friday night when you were a teenager, right? And it's you didn't have much money, if any money with you. You just showed up at the mall with your friends, right? Hung out there. And love my parents too, but if my parents ever showed up at that food court, when I was hanging out with my friends, I would find a new place to hang out with my friends. It's just that's your space. And social media became that, mall, and parents came to Facebook, and students went to Instagram, and then parents came to Instagram, and students went to Snapchat, and then TikTok. And I think that's one of the challenge for educators. Back to your question is they're always at the old mall, you're always at the old mall. Yep. And so how do you possibly get on the level of Gen Z when you're at the old mall? And so I think, again, the more that schools can find turnkey, flexible resources like ASA, and what you all offer is so incredible. What we are trying to build, but just the resources are out there. If K-12 schools can say, let's find something that does work for the teachers, it's turnkey, it's flexible, it fits our schedule, it works for the students on a developmental relevance level, and then of course it works for the families too. That's the third leg of the table that schools need to consider, and the table stands best when you have those 3 legs attached to it: students, parents, and educators.
Yeah. Do you guys want to chime in?
I have lots of thoughts.
Yeah.
Go first,
Yeah, I will. So one of the things that we found as well with Gen Z was we had done a study a little while ago asking them, all right, you get this new piece of information. What do you do from there? And I was really encouraged to see that most of them were actually, I'm going to go and look something else up and try to validate that information. They never just stop with the first thing that's in front of them. And so in a past life, I taught public policy and political science at UMass Amherst. So I had the advantage? Unclear, of teaching college students as opposed to in the K-12 space. So I want to be really upfront with that. But part of my job as an educator, especially in the realm of politics and public policy, which are so divisive anyway, is really making sure that my students were smart consumers of that information. So it was never just, use Wikipedia as a resource, but man, look at the sources, right? Look at the sources. And really understand the different biases that sources can bring. And in research that we found at ASA, teens have mentioned wanting to get better at being able to be more discerning about what information comes from where. And it's something that's really challenging to do on their own, right? And so if teachers come at it with good faith and are able to sort of teach the how of it as opposed to the what of it, that's a really, really important thing. And that's the kind of solution that Gen Z is looking for. So as we're creating solutions for them, as they're trying to bridge that gap with participation, it's also about helping them to be really smart consumers of information. So that way they can make really well-educated decisions. And because we know that they're going out there and cross-validating their resources, it gives me a lot of hope, actually. But creating that change within a classroom, especially at a younger level, like I wish that was something that we had done when I was in school. You were saying earlier, Sofia, civics education in this country, ain't it? We didn't even have civics at my high school. I grew up in rural Vermont, everyone, so, it happens. But it's very, very important to kind of really, again, teach the how of it. But our research really encourages me that kids will really be amenable to that, so.
I think also, on that same exact realm with the whole Wikipedia thing, I'm very glad that I was yelled at by teachers for a very long time not to use Wikipedia as a source, because it teaches you to have critical thinking skills and look things up. And the thing with platforms like TikTok is oftentimes they are going to put things out that you would ideologically agree with, but I think it's even important to validate those sources as well, because you need to be creating this mind frame and this skill set where not everything on these platforms can be unequivocally factual unless the sources are right there. When I make my videos on TikTok, I put the sources right behind me so that people know that I'm not just pulling things out of thin air. But I think with that, specifically on social media, there needs to be education on the K-12 level, more broadly, specifically in computer science, and I'm also going to say philosophy. I'm a big philosophy head, but specifically things like symbolic and predicate logic that will teach you, does this premise match this conclusion? Does this logically actually make sense? There's videos that are going viral right now of Jon Stewart has this new show called The Problem, and he's just absolutely owning random conservative politicians in different areas, because he's taking the logic apart. And I think that if we teach students not only to be able to take the logic of things apart, but then also understand how the platform that they're using works and how they really are just being capitalized on by these platforms, and that they have to have the agency to make the platform their own, we'll see a much better relationship with social media.
Lexi, do you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it fast. I was also thinking about what Sofia said about civic education, but I was thinking that media literacy in this country is not it.
Yeah.
I struggle with this so much. I actually haven't found it to be the case that people double check stuff they see on social media, and to the point that I have young people reach out to me terrified that for example, Tennessee recently passed an anti-drag bill that criminalizes drag performances in public spaces. It does not unilaterally ban drag performances in public spaces, but people I know were saying, they were basically banning trans people. And so the stakes of not making clear or even demonstrating how to check the veracity of stuff going around social media results in people being afraid. Do you know what I mean? Young people are afraid to go outside already. It's already scary for them, especially if they're of a marginalized identity. And so I really struggle with that, especially because teachers really have it cut out for them right now. But, anybody can make an Instagram story graphic on Canva, and yet sometimes I'll see stories that are just patently false being shared around, people who care about stuff. And it's well-intentioned. They're sharing it because they're if this is true, this is horrible. But they're not necessarily, they're 15, they're running to band practice. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not actually reasonable to expect them to be the fact checkers. As a journalist, I have someone whose job it is to fact check me. And because we are nationally disinvesting in our media companies right now, I'm one of the very few journalists who does have like a full-time fact checker checking my stuff, which makes me feel secure. You know what I mean? Like, I know what I'm saying is right because someone else had to read it. But I didn't even know growing up that fact checking was a thing, that journalists got fact checked. Like, I had no idea of the general processes of these. I don't think that teachers should be expected to be responsible for media literacy when it would be great if this country just like prioritized that as a concept. Once again, shouts out Donald Trump, hilarious. But like, if anything, especially for teachers who are in states where, as you said, the teaching of history is being criminalized and fully censored, I would imagine that media literacy is a great tack to approach just to have those kind of conversations about how you interpret content, because they're seeing a lot of stuff that's just patently not true. Like, there's that big account Impact on Instagram. They will take stuff from existing reporting and sometimes articulate it in such a way that is not actually accurate. It sensationalizes it, which is how we get to those same consequences of like fear, making them feel defeated, making them feel like the conditions are both unsafe and unchangeable. I wanted to say one last thing, and I'm trying to remember. Oh, haha. Teen Vogue articles can be printed for your students, and they're often about history and social movements.
And fact-checked.
Yes.
And they're all fact-checked. So take that, Tucker Carlson, you know what I mean? Like, but like, that's my favorite thing in the world, is when teachers, like, my mom's a teacher, my grandma's a teacher, I will probably be an educator at some point. And like, there's nothing that makes me feel better than hearing that a teacher was able to use one of our articles in their classroom. So definitely encourage, if you have free time, which I know no teachers have free time, but you know, if you're ever on the internet.
I can actually personally attest to this because I assigned Teen Vogue articles when I was teaching in 2020. So, 2019 rather. But yeah, it's excellent and fact-checked. It's really good. Yeah, and my students were always really excited to read something by Teen Vogue instead of the dry policy book that I gave them. So, yeah, 10 out of 10.
So a quick question about that idea of fear and the ability to incite anxiety through social media, which we know is a huge mental health concern for across the board with teens. How do you sort of balance the fact that social media can have a lot of negative downsides? And I know there's an entire panel at South by about that issue of is social media sort of being the epicenter of a lot of mental health challenges with students, with this positive aspect of being a platform to help bring people together around issues that are really, really important. And there is this tension, this enormous tension between educators, families, about the level to which social media should be used or banned with young people because of the mental health consequences. Do you guys have perspective on that? Lexi looks like she does.
I wonder about Sofia first.
Yeah, that was, and in the spiel that I gave earlier of all the things that Gen Z has had to deal with, social media, like being guinea pigs for social media has to be one of the worst. Because if you look through my screenshot history from like 2015, you'll see a lot of eating disorder content because that stuff wasn't being filtered in any way, shape, or form back in 2015. And that framework, while it's changed a bit, there still is no legislation that is really keeping these tech companies accountable, because we really are just something for them to capitalize on at the end of the day. And with that, there should be some kind of way to ensure that all of the kids on your platform are not developing like anxiety and actual mental disorders because of what is on your platform. And oh Lord, I could talk about that for a really long time. But point being, I think there's a need to have not just like bad news all the time. Like it's stressful to just watch bad thing after bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happening. And granted, there's a lot of bad things happening, but there needs to be some semblance of like it's gonna be okay, and this isn't the end of the world, and because everything when you're a teenager feels like it's the end of the world.
But there's also a concern, right, that sensationalism generally is negative, right? We sensationalize things that are going to get attention rather than the positive that it's nice to see, but it's not going to get as many headlines, right? So there's that struggle as well between, from a business perspective, that these organizations want to promote what's negative because they'll get more views. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, completely. Oh, completely. Like there's no two ways around it. And like I've experienced it from the age of like 11 to now. And with that, I really think a lot of it goes back to like good design being enforced for these social media companies, because they're not going to do it themselves because they're not able to profit off of them doing a good thing.
Yeah, they're not incentivized to. I was actually going to say I think Gen Z for Change does an excellent job of articulating, taking advantage of the rage machine in order to make sure it gets the necessary views to get the information out, while still balancing that with an awareness that none of these things are one and done interactions. I had recently spoken to a colleague, I guess you would say, of Sofia, someone else at Gen Z for Change, about the Stop Willow campaign, and she was saying, Elise Josie, but she was saying that one of the biggest points that she kept trying to hammer home was like, anything we're saying about Stop Willow, because her TikToks kept going viral, she started making new TikToks just to be like, listen, like, if you're caring about this, you totally should be, but I keep getting comments being like, oh, I'm so hopeless. Like, please do not take this as the opportunity to unplug. Take this as the opportunity to, like, join a lifelong progression of stuff you're gonna work on, because none of this is one and done. And I think it sounds a lot better coming from someone, Elise is 20, like, I think it is much more believable coming from someone who clearly shares the same stakes as you. And has like a shared understanding of what it even means to like be a young person right now.
So back to your point of teachers always being at the old mall, which I love that analogy. Social media is constantly changing. My first platform was Facebook. I'm still on Facebook. I have kids. And still have Instagram. Do watch your TikTok videos. But it is. These platforms come and go. We know that there is concern from the federal government about TikTok and privacy issues. There are certain states that have started to ban TikTok for state employees. Platforms come and go constantly. So how do you navigate that, particularly from an activism standpoint, that a lot of your stuff now is done on TikTok? Do you feel like TikTok is sort of a necessary piece of this, or would another platform coming up do just as well, and every student would sort of migrate to the new shop at the mall and leave all of us back here in TikTok world where the youth no longer is? Do you see that happening, or do you feel like TikTok's here to stay?
I feel like unless that shop at the mall gets closed down, like people are staying at that shop, and namely because it's able to sort of create these decentralized movements and then build off of them in a really organic way, and that like on TikTok you are able to reach hundreds and thousands of, if not millions of people, to be able to cash in on this one action, like do this one thing that can make your world like 0.1% better, but at least they know that when they're going to that platform, they'll be able to find something like that. And each platform, just like as a young person, considering I've been on like all of them, they have different connotations in our mind, and Instagram is just a little more serious than TikTok. And I don't necessarily see that being a purely organizational space in the way that TikTok is. And
is that because it's more sort of curated content? Like you?
Yeah, it's substantially more curated. There isn't like a For You feed, like the equivalent, the Explore page, like changes every 2 days. Like if I talk about pasta, I'll get just pasta there. Like I'm not even joking. I went to an Italian restaurant the other day, and now all that's on my Explore page is pasta, which isn't all I care about, believe it or not. Like I love pasta as much as the next person, but you would expect that the content that you're getting is aligned with the holistic person, not something that they said this one time.
Lexi, yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think almost in comparison to, like I've been on social media since I was like 8, and I think my first account was on like LiveJournal, hilariously. She said, "What's LiveJournal?" It was Tumblr before. I'm still on
RIP
Tumblr though. So I almost feel like it's less about like leaving one mall for another, and unfortunately, it's more like learning a new language each time a new platform emerges, and then you kind of have to keep bits of each old language in order to maintain. It's back to the media literacy point, right? Like figuring out how to navigate a platform safely. And the thing I wanted to say was that. About Instagram, Meta has been involved in several cases of litigation around reproductive rights. Like right now, there are like minors who they and their parents are being targeted over potential abortions that Meta provided data to the government, and Meta owns, Meta is Facebook, but it's also Instagram. And I think people typically forget that, and WhatsApp, yes. And I think people typically forget that their Instagram DMs are just as much so like a vulnerable space. I don't say this to, again, fearmonger, and I also know that like, because it's all state by state, it's really hard to keep track of where these expectations are being set and where they're not. They're also not doing a good job of publicizing it, which I believe is intentional. But I think, people are very hype about TikTok right now and very afraid of TikTok because it's the same thing we do people were afraid of Facebook 10 years ago. And like, we probably should be more afraid of it now for different reasons. But I almost feel like because Meta is such a behemoth, like we don't give it the scrutiny it deserves. And now it's already like a part of like our government systems, you know what I mean? That it's already being used in a way that is like threatening, including for minors. So I would just recommend like that could be a part of media literacy, realizing how much data collection is involved in having a social media account, because like young people have no idea that like everything they've ever posted online is something that's like being sold to ad buyers, being used in like, the college free applications they get in the mail. Like they have no idea like how everything they've ever said
How it works. Yeah. Is that something you focus on quite a bit at the Social Institute, to try to sort of make that a reality for students?
Yeah, I think the question that you posed earlier of like, even if the platforms change and as they evolve, I feel like there are life skills that don't evolve. And it's, like self-awareness or social awareness and responsible decision-making. And, sure, your core values may evolve, of course, as you, grow, but there's timeless life skills that we could be teaching the students in a very an ever-evolving space, like social media. And a great example of this was I was with students, it was a few weeks ago, and we had them, pull up Instagram and go into the settings. It's like buried 3 clicks in, and you get to look at your ad interests, which is like, right? If you haven't done that yet, Google how to look up your ad interests on Instagram, and it's fascinating, the keywords that they have attached to you. And you're not teaching them in that moment that Instagram is bad or good. You're just making them more aware. And I think the more we can make students aware that like you're not alone in the whatever it is you're navigating, like you're not alone, or you're more aware about how platforms, and like you make the call at the end of the day, it's your choice, but that awareness is such a gift, I think, that K-12 can give to students.
It's great. So in the 2 minutes we've got left, I'd love 30 seconds from each of you on the question about how to make young people more engaged in the social issues they care about. What needs to change and who needs to change it?
I'll jump.
Go ahead.
I'll jump in. Back to the students can't be what they can't see. I believe what needs to change is they need to be hearing from more positive role models in the school system. So instead of kind of old school where maybe a teacher is facilitating a discussion, how can you have actually older students maybe coming down to having discussions with other grade levels? Like I see trailblazing districts and schools starting to do that, and the level of engagement, and you could see like their ears opening up because they deeply respect students who, like, a 12th grader hearing from someone like Sofia is just like mind-blowing to a student. And so I think 5 years from now, you're gonna see more districts teaching students just the communication skills to be able to do that, the leadership skills, and it's gonna be pretty cool to watch.
I won't hold you all to a question, but answer. But if anyone else has thoughts on this as we're wrapping up.
We actually asked teens about this at one point, and to the point that Laura just made, seeing more high-profile people like them, like Sofia, actually getting out there and getting involved, that's what they feel like is going to really push the needle on things like racial equality and gender equality, LGBTQ plus rights. And they talked a lot, we've mentioned this earlier in our panel as well, what they're actually learning in school. So change the curriculum, but they want to see themselves and their issues represented in the people who are leading the movements that they care about. So we talk a lot about representation matters. We hear it a lot in media. It means even more in this space as well.
Sophia, last word from you.
Yeah, sorry, we'll go super quickly. It's I think there's this idea that like activist pedagogy has to be totally separate from everything else that we do. And the reason that kids go to school and they're like, ugh, I have to go to like math class or something, is that they don't see like the way that what they're learning can be used to change their worlds. And the most impactful thing for me personally, I went to this program called Code with Classi, teaches girls, gender nonconforming, and trans students how to code throughout the country. If you know anyone that's of this age, they should apply. It's codewithclassi.com/apply. And within that space, I was able to learn computer science in the context that like I'm changing the world with this tool. It's just a matter of marrying the two subjects.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, with that, thank you very much for our panelists. If you have questions, we'll be at the back of the room. Thanks a lot, guys.